Dennis, are we good to go?
Yep, we're live.
Awesome. Well, usually I like to open these discussions and talk a little bit about either a value of startup grind or this time I'd like to talk a little bit about an observation I made while Chris, Vicky, and I were visiting the Startup Grind Global Conference out in Silicon Valley last month. Um, it was a pleasure, and met a lot of incredible entrepreneurial catalysts from around the world there. And one thing that stood out to me the most was that a lot of these speakers and directors were willing to embrace the failures that they've had and really take off the mask and talk about that. And I found it as a very humanizing and relieving um, takeaway. And it's something that I want to encourage people to be able to do here. A lot of times people will talk about a lot of the successes they've had, and you'll see all of the people's best selves on social media. And I really think that this kind of crafted image isn't the truth. And I think that it's also something that it also can be misleading for a lot of entrepreneurs out there. And I think a lot of people that have been through that really understand that it's not all rainbows and unicorns, and that it is a bit of a grind, hence startup grind, pun intended, or whatever you want to make of it. Um, but yeah, so maybe tonight after the talk, you guys can maybe talk with someone about maybe one of the things that you're stumbling on, and I think that by doing that, you guys can really understand where you can look for help, and not just talk about the things that are going good, but ways that you might be able to bounce ideas off on how to help each other improve their business or some of their personal or professional branding. So with that being said, some of the other values that you might have noticed looking around here is that we are here to make friends, not contacts. We're here to give first, not take. And we want to help others before helping ourselves. And so that's something that we try to embody here. And if there's anything that I can do or our other director, Chris, over there, let us know. And we want to help make you guys feel welcome, get you plugged in with the entrepreneurial community in Oklahoma City. And yeah, just reach out and talk to us. So with those values being said, we've partnered with a lot of like-minded individuals, and I want to thank especially DD Audio and Project 3810. Raise your hands. Thank you guys for letting us use your event space and helping contribute to the mission. Yeah, yeah. Are we going to be giving away a co-working membership later? So make sure if you didn't get a raffle ticket already, after the talk, don't need to get up now, but after the talk, go talk with Vicky over there and we'll get you plugged in. Dennis, our faithful producer, has been helping us settle out with these as well. He's with the Show Starts Now Studios, and we're very thankful to have him. And Sparity might have had to take off, but we can thank them for the food for tonight, and Brian with Rack 59 for the drinks. So thank you guys for being such a partner with the community as well. Also, I wanted to mention Deep Fork Technologies, which is Chris over there, and I think we saw some other Deep Fork folks. Nodecraft, Toner Refill, and Hoofi, who were here earlier and helped contribute again to the mission. Last couple plugs here. 1 Million Cups, thank you guys for plugging us in your social media this week. And I believe tomorrow at 9 a.m. they'll be having a meeting at Starspace for their next 1 Million Cups installation. And there's also a TED OKC event coming up that we've got some pamphlets over there. So again, I know it's kind of a long list. We're thankful. It doesn't happen naturally. If you think that those values that I mentioned earlier align with some of your personal brand or your company's brand, please come and talk with us. We're looking to partner with more people and looking for ways that we can grow and continue to give back to the community. And lastly, we've had some incredible guests join us, and I've been looking forward for some time to having Kraettli Epperson on the show with us. I think my favorite thing about him is that he really brings the entrepreneur full circle. He's got experience as a founder, as a CEO, as an angel investor, and a few other things here that I want to mention. He's an avid startup geek, a technologist and investor. He's the owner of R7 Solutions and Jump Phase Ventures. He's also currently the CEO of Vigilant Aerospace that we'll get to hear a little bit about, and runs a really neat blog, if you want to check it out, called techventuregeek.com. In our discussions, he mentioned that probably one of his gravestone chalk-ups is going to be that he co-founded Questia Media, which is the largest digital library, and they had a successful acquisition. He's also, over his time, launched over 15 tech companies. He's generated several patents. He's managed a venture accelerator and created the first undergraduate course in entrepreneurship at Rice University. So let's give a nice startup Ryan welcome to Kraettli. So I kind of read off a little bit of a laundry list of some of your background, but can you fill us in on some of the blanks on what I might be missing here?
Sure. I'm happy to go over some of the things I've done. I want to thank you and Chris for inviting me to do this, and thank you to Startup Grind. Can I ask one question of the audience before we start?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I like to do this. I'm curious, how many people do we have that think of themselves as entrepreneurs? So quite a few, almost everybody. That's awesome. And how many of you think of yourselves as technologists of one kind or another? Any type of technologist? And how many of you, so how many do we have there? Maybe 4 or 5?
5.
And how many of you all think of yourselves as creative people primarily?
Let's turn your mic on too.
A lot of, is my mic on? Is my mic not on? No. Sorry about that.
We talk about our failures, like not turning the mic on. And
All right, can you hear me now? Much better. Okay, I just talk loud all the time anyway, so. Good, so.
Embrace the values.
Yeah, exactly. I can just yell. So how many creatives did we have? We had a lot. I like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, wow, okay. That's great. And how many who don't classify themselves as either of those two things, who have another type of business? Manufacturing, for example, design, manufacturing, lots of cool stuff. I like that. All right, good. And how many of you all have what you think of as a startup? I asked if you were an entrepreneur, but 3 or 4 or 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, and how many of you think of yourselves as having, in addition to maybe your startup, or instead of your startup, you have a side hustle? Some of you have that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, all right, excellent. I like to know, what the audience is likely to be interested in, and I do hope we save some time for some questions at the end.
Absolutely.
But so to give you a little bit of an idea of my background, I started out my entrepreneurial journey as a receptionist. I was in college, and some friends of mine had started this weird company that was allowing corporations to exchange these weird things called emails. And on Friday, they were in a family office. They had investors in Houston. I was in college, and they had this office that lost its receptionists at like noon on Friday. And I knew a few of these people who just graduated, and they were like, can you come answer the phones on Friday afternoons so we don't have to do it? And I was like, okay, that's a job. It was in downtown Houston. I thought they were cool, so I went and did it. And so on Friday afternoons, I was answering the phone, and that earned me a spot of a summer internship with this early stage startup that was at the very beginning of a lot of digital communications and exchange. And so I got a summer internship. I think I was the 4th or 5th employee initially, and then during the summer internship, I was definitely like the 5th employee. And they had me in marketing, and there wasn't a lot for me to do as an intern in marketing. And so one day, one of the people who had founded the company came to me and said, we have this thing that we've thought about doing. We've thought about building a little app to do this and allow our users to use it. We want to pull down information from the Securities and Exchange Commission. These were filings that corporations make, and we want to share them on our network, because they had, by this time, had built a network that people were dialing into and corporations were using to exchange stuff. And they were like, I don't know, nobody has time to do it. And I was like, I'm sitting here answering the phone. I could probably do that. I had no idea what I was doing whatsoever. So I spent the first part of the summer teaching myself the technologies and a little bit of the stack needed to actually do that. And then the second half of the summer.
What year was this?
This was like 93, 94. Yeah. So it was very early, and the internet was just starting to exist by about 95. So anyway, I wrote this little app, and they really liked it. Their clients started using it quite heavily. It got written up in PC Magazine as sort of the first app of this type, exchanging financial information over the early internet. And then about a year later, I was their first product manager of all their internet services. They didn't really have anybody to kind of shepherd their apps as they were emerging onto this very early internet in sort of 95, 96. And so that was kind of my first exposure. I was supposed to go to law school. I was not supposed to do this at all. But I was totally smitten. It was a lot of fun. These were my friends. They had the backing of this family office that was allowing them to build this little company. It really felt like the frontier. And so doing that was really exciting for me. The nice thing about that, I'll tell you, is someone who's ended up then serving in roles as an entrepreneur, an executive in companies, a founder, co-founder, and from time to time an investor. Having had years of experience as a system administrator where I was in charge of security, having years doing some early application development has been invaluable to me over the years. And serving on the investment side of businesses, it's great when you run into people who have come from a technical background to go into investment. I love that, and I love being someone who really enjoys the technology and is happy to sit down and talk with somebody about their stack or something before we look at their investment, because I just feel like you can learn a lot that way, and I've learned more being an angel investor than I've learned doing anything else whatsoever.
How often do you run into situations where you meet other angel investors without a technology background?
It really varies a lot, and there are a lot of them. I think it depends a lot on which part of the country you're in. Certainly, you also sometimes run into investors who have a financial background. You run into investors who have an industrial background in all kinds of things, and you certainly run into investors with a real estate background. That's quite common in this part of the country, all of whom bring enormous value to any sort of investment. But I like to talk tech, so I enjoy that and getting in there and talking to people. And you end up on committees that as an investor, as a person who can help to evaluate that. So most investments are made as and by groups, and when you have a group, you often have people who have different roles and responsibilities in evaluating sometimes numerous investments that you're considering. And so it's always fun to be the tech guy. If it's a tech investment, if it's something else, well, you have to sort of go with the flow and see what it looks like. But that's a little bit of my background of how I sort of got my first exposure to entrepreneurship.
That's great. So during these exposures to entrepreneurship, what type of challenges did you meet, or what type of maybe stumbling blocks did you come across, and what did you learn from those? So being primarily an entrepreneur and primarily a founder and co-founder, I've had to become a generalist. I've had to become, and I've been a specialist working with very early stage companies, mostly as a co-founder. So, I have had to learn a lot of things quickly, sometimes the hard way, sometimes the expensive way. I like to joke that I have the most expensive MBA you can get because I got it investing in many failed very early stage companies. That is really the most expensive way to learn about business. But a lot of it is you're constantly having to deal with things that are brand new, things for which there might not be much precedent, there might not be much information. You might be in a new market, which is obviously very typical with startups. And so you really have to begin to get instincts and learn how to make best guesses about what's going on in the market. You have to learn to understand people. Do you have any maybe tangible takeaways that people could use to approach that unknown territory?
The first thing is you have to keep a very open mind, and you really have to be willing to look at businesses that you don't necessarily know much about. I've looked at biotech businesses, and I don't know a lot about biotech, but in that process I had to learn quite a bit. You mentioned that I ran a venture accelerator. So I ran a venture accelerator called Venture Spur here in Oklahoma City. And then we also had an office in Dallas, and we had some backers who were investors both in Oklahoma and in Texas. And that was a learning curve. Suddenly trying to raise the money and then find the companies and get them through a 3-month program and then help them raise money afterwards. There's no user manual. There's no way to know how to do that. We spent probably the first year figuring out how to do it. And then we really more than doubled the size the second year. And over years, it takes to make investments like this, angel investments, which are the earliest stage, usually individual investments that individuals are making in early stage companies, take years to mature. And so that's always a nerve-wracking process for every angel investor. Even the most successful ones have those nerve-wracking moments where the company that they thought was going to be really successful does not end up being the one that hits it out of the ballpark. But another one that they really didn't think was such a great bet, but their partner convinced them to invest in, ended up being the great company that made the full return on the entire thing. So there's a lot of that. And part of what you learn is to know what you don't know. Part of what you learn is to keep an open mind, to build up a great group of people around you who can help you with the things that you don't know, and that you can rely on to have great judgment. Even on the day you're having an off day, somebody else can help you make that judgment. And as an investor, that's been really valuable.
That's great. You get by with a little help from the friends.
Yeah, very important.
So Kraettli, you're the owner of R7 Solutions, Jump Phase Ventures. You're also the CEO at Vigilant Aerospace. I think there's a lot of people in the audience that are wearing multiple hats with day jobs, side hustles, entrepreneurial gigs. How do you balance your time between your different ventures, and what type of advice can you give for others that are here with us today that may be trying to do the same balancing act?
Well, I can tell you a little bit about that. So right now, the only thing that I'm doing full time is Vigilant Aerospace. And I'm happy to tell you a little bit about that. It's I think, an interesting company, and I've learned a lot doing that. Jump Phase Ventures is essentially my holding company for things that I have previously invested in or advised or otherwise been involved in early stage companies. And then R7 Solutions is a company that's essentially passive right now. It is a company that does mostly geographic information systems for oil and gas, rail, wireless, cities and counties and that sort of thing. It hosts Harvard University's nuclear non-proliferation website and mapping system, which was a contract that we just ended up with that's continued for many years. So it's, I'm not very active with those things right now. I am focused on Vigilant Aerospace, but have learned a lot from those businesses.
Great. Yeah, tell us a little bit about what Vigilant does.
Okay, yeah. So that's what I do full time right now. So Vigilant Aerospace, based here in Oklahoma City, is a company that has some seed fund backing here in Oklahoma and elsewhere. And the company licenses technology from NASA for building safety systems for unmanned aircraft. So this includes a patent that we've exclusively licensed from NASA Armstrong, which is out in the Mojave Desert at Edwards Air Force Base, where NASA does a lot of the testing and development of their new aerospace technologies. And so several years ago, one of the inventors, an engineer there at NASA, put together the systems and the technology and the algorithm to do automatic avoidance so that unmanned aircraft could have a piece of software that would allow that aircraft to self-separate and avoid running into other aircraft. And so they took that out, they roadshow these things, so they go out to conferences and say, we have this patent, we have this technology, somebody should use it. And at NASA, that's really interesting because, of course, most of the things that they do are for one spacecraft, one time. And so when they have something that they think the larger market and other aircraft or spacecraft could use, they're really excited about it. We ran across that, and there's a venture capital firm, Cimarron Capital Partners here in town, that asked me to investigate that, write a business plan for it, and then ultimately they were like, well, you wrote the business plan, so now you have to run the company. And so it's like, okay. So that's how I got involved in that. And the company now has a commercial version of that product. It's primarily software, integrates with some pieces of hardware that allow it to interact with aviation transponders that other airplanes carry, allow it to interact with small radars and other types of sensors. And then it takes all that and it creates a model of the airspace in its little tiny brain that it's constantly monitoring. And if it predicts that there's a potential collision or even aircraft getting too close to each other, it will tell the pilot of the unmanned aircraft and the autopilot, you need to turn right now, go. And so that's primarily what it does. It does some other things as well. We have a version for airspace management for small airports and for people who are flying drones or multiple drones in a program. And we're involved in several I'm on several federal committees helping to write the standards that will hopefully drive the regulations for unmanned aircraft autonomy to become something that we can really do. That's really emerging right now. And we're also involved in a couple federal programs to do test flights for the FAA to demonstrate how you can fly drones safely, particularly beyond visual line of sight, where somebody is sitting on the ground or in a command van controlling the aircraft, but it's flying way over the horizon. Maybe it's following a pipeline or a road or a bridge, or it's going to a fire, or it's going and doing search and rescue, and it's got to go far away from where it started to do that. That is still something that the FAA is figuring out how to do safely. And so we're trying to provide a key component of that to provide the avoidance system to make it safe to fly near other aircraft.
That's incredible. Obviously, Oklahoma has quite a bit of a history with aerospace. Is that why you chose to have that company here, or do you split your time between Houston with that as well, or?
There is great aviation history and talent here, which is good. And of course, there's also really a growing emphasis in the state on growing aviation as an industry here. In Oklahoma, you have oil and gas, you have agriculture, you have aviation and light manufacturing, much of which is for aviation. There's a lot of overlap. And so there's a lot of emphasis in the state on diversifying and having more of that light manufacturing, a lot more aerospace. Having major Air Force bases like Tinker helps with people with skills coming out and wanting to go somewhere. So that's part of the reason. We were located here. Cimarron Capital has an office here. They're primarily headquartered here. And I was here and have good reasons to be here. So it was just really the right place for us to be.
That seems like quite a happy intersect of everyone's needs.
Yeah.
What else have you found Oklahoma City to bring to the table for some of your ventures and just general entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Yeah, so, we talk a lot about sort of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and Oklahoma City has huge advantages. So we have investors with offices in Silicon Valley, Washington, D.C., Bentonville, Arkansas, Houston, Chicago, and Oklahoma City and Stillwater. That's like the group of investors that have backed this company so far. And we like being in Oklahoma City because primarily the cost of doing business here is very low compared to a lot of those other places we could be located. With a company that is developing new technologies that take time to develop, they take regulatory changes to hit the market, they take market changes to develop. Being in Oklahoma City gives us a lot of runway, gives us an opportunity to participate in those markets as they develop, rather than being on a massive burn rate in a massive city where you're constantly fighting just to sort of keep your doors open, fighting to raise your next round, fighting to be in a position where you can keep all your engineers. Being a company like this in Oklahoma City is interesting and exciting. And so for all those reasons, I mean, there's great talent here. There are great investors here who are in it for the long term, which is also nice. And then you've got a very low cost of doing business. And then there's intersection with the aerospace industry itself. So all those things, together make a good combination for this particular business. It's not for every business. I mean, there are lots of businesses for whom another city might be a better match. But for us, it's a really good match.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. All right, do you have any other past experiences you'd like to share with us, or any other things that you think the audience could take away from what you've learned grinding in the past on some of your ventures?
Um, sure. I'll mention a couple of ventures just to give you all a little bit more background and just some of the other things I've done so that maybe we'll seed some questions and maybe there'll be some specific interest around something. You mentioned Questia Media. For better or worse, that probably will be one of those in my epitaph. So we, in the late 90s, in a studio apartment about a quarter the size of this room, myself and two other co-founders started a company to digitize books. So there were a couple things we were doing. One thing that we were doing is that we were trying to pioneer the idea of micropayments. We were going to publishers and asking them for their out-of-print books, books that they sold 3 or 4 copies of a year, mostly to libraries because the book had been destroyed and they needed another copy of Socrates, and so they would print one, and they sold maybe 5 or 10 of those a year. And so we had the idea that we're going to build an academic digital library so that you wouldn't have to go to the library at midnight before your paper was due and find that that last copy of that book that you needed to finish your paper had been checked out by somebody else. So we were going to digitize those books and allow you to have instant access to them online. And in exchange for having access to that book, we were going to take a percentage of what we collected and then from subscribers and then distribute it back to publishers based on usage. So if they had 10 pages of that philosophy book used this month, a percentage of the overall use of the library would go back to that publisher. And those publishers were making no money on these books. These were books that literally they were like, we wish these were not our responsibility, but yes, you can have them. So we started this company, and the first thing we did was we went out and we would literally get on like a party line phone and pretend like we had a conference line, and we would call these publishers, and our CEO was a heavy smoker, so he had really, really deep voice because we had all just like graduated college 2-3 years before. And so he sounded really, he was like,
official.
This is the CEO calling, and I'd like to talk to you about your backstock, and, you know, these books. And they take him seriously, at least far enough to let us get on the phone and talk with somebody. And we would get these pilot agreements with these major publishers. It's like, we have all these books that we do nothing with. And essentially it was like, we'll let you publish them, and if we like it, we'll probably take it in-house and fire you. We're like, okay, fine. So we started getting contracts. Now, they just didn't send us the books, mind you. They just told us, yes, you have the right to republish that online, and then you'll pay us a percentage of the usage of the overall library. Okay. They didn't really know what that meant. We didn't really know what that meant. But we went out and then gradually started collecting these books. We had to go to essentially estate sales and garage sales and stuff like that. Before we did that, we went and I basically created an HTML mock-up of this product, this digital library that we're going to build the world's largest of. And we shopped it around to some angel investors in Houston, one of whom was like, yeah, I like that. And so he gave us some money. It was like $300,000 bucks. So we could go out and we could actually begin to build a prototype of this product. And I, having previously done a little bit of software development, kind of got the duty among the 3 of us to start writing it. So we had the CEO who had the nice deep voice and he had a Harvard Law degree, and he also
That helps too.
That helps. And he, it was like, we're gonna pioneer this idea of micropayments. Like, this is gonna work, and they're gonna give us all their copyrights, right? So that was the idea. And then we had a COO who was just a logistics genius who could help kind of bring it all together and get people to do stuff and get books, because we needed books desperately. And me, who was sitting in the corner going, I'm supposed to write this? What is this? We don't even know what this is. You know, so anyway, it was prototype to prototype to prototype. But the prototype got good enough that people started investing larger amounts of money. And so we went out eventually and we had 300 people. We had offices in every major publishing center in the world. So we had offices in Manhattan and Los Angeles and London, and we were in Europe a lot. And then we had offices in Asia where we had all of our outsourcing because we were scanning tens of thousands of books. We had the logistical process of getting the book, and then we had to tag it, which you would do with an AI now. But back then, you had to have a team of 50 or 100 people to tag everything. So you knew the difference between George Washington University and George Washington, the president, and everything else, because we were trying to build a library that would have very long-term value. And in order to do that, you have to semantically tag your library so that your searches make sense and you can actually find stuff and students will actually use your product, right? So we built the company up. It had about 300 employees at its height, and company raised quite a lot of money. And then at one point, we can talk about failures. So eventually, I, having recently graduated from school and not having as deep a voice, was replaced by the CTO of Disney, and was made sort of CTO emeritus after that, and I exited the company, and that was great. That was it was pretty awesome, because I was young, and it was like I just exited this company, and then I started investing in other companies, many of which failed, right? Not all of them. Some of them are still alive and doing great, but many of them failed, and learned a lot doing that. So that's kind of how I got my first major exit in order to do a lot of the later things.
So as you entered in from the founder stage and moved into the investor stage, what did you start to look for in companies that you wanted to invest in? And what would you say would be some red flags of some of the failures that are maybe 2020 in hindsight, and what were maybe some of the stuff that you would look for again in a company?
So I can talk about the right way to do it, but I'll start by talking about the wrong way to do it, because
Great.
that's far more entertaining, I'm sure.
Lay it on us.
Yeah, exactly. So don't invest in your buddies. That's like item number one. That's probably, you don't really do that. And I didn't do, like some people do that a lot, and I didn't do that a lot. I did that a little bit, but really don't do that. Like, it's okay to do it like if it's kind of for fun and it's like it's a donation, and that's fine. But if you're trying to learn how to do angel investment and build big companies, that's not the way to do it. Your buddies may be great, but let somebody else invest in them, right? So that's number one. I learned a little bit about that the hard way. You got to look for companies with big markets, big ambitions, companies with leaders that are business leaders, that are evidently business leaders, that are able to convey that vision, that are able to attract the talent that they need and can build a great team relatively quickly. You need to look for companies that have a fantastic set of financials that make sense, that stand up to some scrutiny, and then you get into how to do it right. Okay, so don't invest in companies that don't have at least 2 or 3 of those things, right? You got to have those things. You know, you can have a mediocre business plan with a great set of founders and a great team. I'm sure you all have probably read the books and seen this kind of stuff before. You can have a business that has a great plan and an okay team, and you may do okay. That's not ideal, but people grow, people learn, and sometimes they can learn on the fly. You can have businesses that have a great team and a great business plan, but they're really not at the right time. They're too early. Maybe they're somehow too late, which also happens, and that's really hard. And timing actually matters with startups. And a lot of things it doesn't matter as much, but with startups it really does. And I've had lots of companies where I invested and it was like, oh, that was way too early. What was I thinking? I've invested, I'll give you another example of a company that failed. I learned a lot from it. Invested in a company that was developing essentially an appliance that would sit behind point of sale systems and allow you to connect to the point of sale system remotely and then consolidate all that data upwards from a variety of point of sale systems. So people who had bars, you know, restaurants, hotels, had 3 or 4, for whatever reason, ended up with point of sale systems, and they had no way to get all that data. They were literally spending all day driving around. These were small business owners, and they'd go to all their bars, and they'd find out they'd been ripped off again last night, the way it always happened, and they had to go through all the receipts and figure out what happened. And so this system allowed them to not do that. They could consolidate all that data automatically. It was a great idea. I mean, it was going to save them so much money. They loved it. What we found not too far into that, about a year in, is we were competing directly with the point of sale vendors who all planned this system themselves and were selling their own consolidation solutions with the idea that if you just move all of your point of sale systems to that particular vendor's point of sale, they'll consolidate it for you. It was almost a free service. And so we learned pretty quickly, brilliant idea, bad timing, and you were competing with a vendor whom you were very dependent on for your integrations, for example. So I lost a lot of money doing that, but learned a tremendous amount that way. So
Yeah, that's tough. Well, I wanted to save a little bit more time for questions for this session. You guys, do we have anyone in the audience that has a burning question they'd like to ask Kraettli? Yeah,
So when
we're
you're
going to give you a microphone here in a second, I believe. So, great.
Hello? Check, check, check.
Unmute it.
Hello?
Hit the switch.
Hello? I did. Yeah, I'm doing it back and forth.
It's all good.
Okay, the green light's on.
Bingo.
Is it working? Okay.
We're learning to fly.
I wanted to. So my question is, typically college students are poor, and if they're probably paying their college, incurring debt, so on and so forth, and you're starting this business. So how did you survive? Like, if you have investors, were you guys using some of the money to live off of, or how are you meeting your basic needs while trying to get this thing off the ground?
that is a feature, not a bug. Being a poor college student means that you know how to live on very little money, hopefully. Not every college student, but many, like me, for example. I had been working to help pay some of my bills in college, and so I was always used to working. I made it to class most of the time, but I was working. So, in my early experience, after getting that entrepreneurial bite, I was really interested in working with startups. And I had few responsibilities. I didn't have a lot of overhead. I was able to move quickly. I ended up co-founding a company in London, for example. I was able to move around. I was very fortunate to have chosen a school that had a very low tuition and a very generous sort of program of scholarship and loans and things like that. And I chose it specifically because of that. Coming from Oklahoma City, where I grew up, I went to Rice University in Houston, and it was very affordable at the time that I went. It is still among the schools that it's peers with. It's extremely affordable, and they've announced a bunch of new affordability programs. That was, a strategic decision for me because I didn't want a lot of debt. And it's a very hard decision to make. It's very hard to find those things. There are more schools that are emerging because they realize the problem. But for me, it was an opportunity for me to try a lot of things as a student who didn't have a lot of overhead. I barely had a car. It was like, yeah, I got to put some gas in it. And so I took that as the license to go and learn a lot of things, work at companies that were small, unstable, confused, and a lot of fun and incredible learning opportunities. I mean, when you hand responsibility to a 20-year-old and say, figure out how we're going to market this product or build this product dealing with the SEC, it's like, you got to be a little crazy to let a 20-year-old do that. But I got those kinds of opportunities working for startups. And it's the piece of advice I repeat over and over to people is work for a startup at every opportunity, of whether it's a side hustle or whether it's just a crazy thing that you decide to go do and it doesn't make any sense. There is no better way to learn about startups than to work on startups. And I would tell that to any student. Arrange your life such that you have an experience working with early stage companies, because you'll get more responsibility and you'll learn a lot more faster doing that than you can any other way.
So it sounds like after the college graduation, not inflating the lifestyle, but also taking a chance on companies that are taking a chance on you as a fresh graduate was kind of the way that you entered that. That's great.
Yeah, and of course there are students who go get high-paying corporate jobs straight out of school, and that's great. But if you can save some time there in the middle to go contribute to a struggling startup, I encourage you to do that.
Take some chances.
Yeah.
That's great. Do we have any other questions in the audience so far? Yeah, we'll have the microphone coming your way. And up here in the front in the green sweatshirt. What's your name?
My name is Nick.
Nick, thanks for joining us tonight, man.
So it's a pleasure being here. This is definitely my first time at a meeting like this. So just two basic questions, like what is actually a startup? And like the investing, like what do you mean? I mean, I know what investing is, but I've just never heard this. That makes sense?
I can try and answer those two questions real quickly. So there are lots of different types of startups. You know, a startup is sort of any new business. Most of the types of startups that I'm talking about are startups that are innovative and scalable, meaning that you can put effort and money into them, and they're designed to grow to a very large size. They're trying to address large markets. Not every business is like that. There are a lot of great businesses that are small businesses and are intended to be that way. When we talk about angel investors and venture capital investment, they're primarily targeting businesses that can grow quickly and that may be able to have certain advantages in their market that give them sort of an unfair advantage to grow quickly, right? And so when I talk about startups and high-tech startups and that sort of thing, those are the types of startups I'm focused on because they have that scalability, right?
What determines that?
You know,
They're scalable, like if they have all the steps and everything drawn out well? Or?
So planning, yes, is an important part of that. Having a concept for a business that can go and dominate a market, having some new concepts or new advantages that are going to allow your business to grow quickly and leverage something, whether it's a technology or a particular type of service or something that's innovative. Those are the things that typically, you know, help companies to grow quickly and to dominate a market, or at least be a major player in that market and return a very good, return on investment.
Right.
So those are the basics of what investors look for. You know, I've talked a little bit about angel investors. Angel investors are usually first investors. You often have friends and family, and then you'll have angel investors who are people who are investing their own money individually. They're not part of a fund necessarily. They may be part of a group, but they're really investing because they're interested in the business. They're personally interested in being invested. Often they are people who have been successful entrepreneurs and want to give back. So they may make a number of small investments. So that's an angel investor. I had someone talk earlier about what an angel investor was. They were asking me questions about that. And then you often have small funds where you have professional investors who take money from other people. They aggregate that money together, and then they go through a specific process, often with a specific investment thesis or theme. It's like, we're only going to invest in this type of biotech company that is doing this type of work, or we're only going to invest in early stage technology companies that work in this industry, right? And so they have an idea and some expertise that they bring to bear, and so they'll start a fund, and it might be a small fund for very early seed stage investments of $1 million or less, or it might be a large venture capital fund where they're typically investing $5 million into companies that they want to be worth, $150 million by the time they're done. And so they'll set up a professional investment firm. And so you have this whole range of different types of investors.
Those were great questions, and I think if you ask those same questions to any other guest, you're always going to come up with a different answer for what is a startup. So oftentimes it's a lot of times overlooked, but it's really important to hit on those basics too. Before we go to the next question, if you guys are comfortable, we'd love for you to shout us out on social media. I think you can add us at Startup Grind OKC or hashtag Startup Grind. We'd love for some friendly shares. And we'll be getting to the raffle here in a little bit, but before we get to that, we'd like to hit on some more questions. Yes. I don't know who was first. The gentleman in the blue shirt? We'll give it to the man with the microphone.
Okay. So, quick question. As an angel investor, are you looking for companies that can last or grow fast? And typically, how fast are you looking at in terms of growth?
So there are a variety of answers to that question. Most angel investors, traditional angel investors in the US, if you go out and look at a lot of the groups of angel investors, are looking for companies that can grow quickly. And quickly is usually 5 years or less. That there will be some sort of liquidity or exit event that will allow that investor to get their money back. And that's true really for most of the different types of professional investors. So angel investors, non-professional, investing their own money. Some of them are very unserious and some of them are very serious, but they're all looking for something that will exit usually within about 5 years. And venture capital firms, it's the same way. It's 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years. After about 5 years, they're beginning to owe money back to their investors. So venture capitalists are actually investing other people's money, and so they have a timeline on which they have to get that money back to those investors with some kind of return. And so they really can't invest in things that are going to take longer than that to be able to reach an inflection point where they can be sold, or they're going to be acquired oftentimes by a larger player. They may have an IPO, they may go public, lots of different ways to exit, but they have to have an exit in order to continue doing what they do. Can't be a venture capitalist if you don't get some return back.
I think the next will be the gentleman in the corduroy blazer.
I guess I have kind of a restart up. I had a successful business in Nashville, Tennessee for a number of years and moved here for family reasons and trying to reopen my business here. How do I go about finding an angel investor? Or I've also been interested in Kickstarter or Indiegogo. I don't really know anything other than what I've read on their website. How do I find out somebody who has personal experience with that or can give me some insight on that?
So without knowing what your business is, I'll just kind of give a general answer on a couple of things that might be helpful for everybody. If you are starting a business that is likely to scale and is going to provide a return on investment, then there are angel investors and there are groups of angel investors, both in Oklahoma and in surrounding states and throughout the US, that are always looking for great deals, okay? And they advertise. I mean, you can go and do a Google search for angel investor group and you will find hundreds of them. And they vary. Some of them are very active, some of them don't really exist anymore, they just have a website. And you can start from Oklahoma City and kind of feel your way out. And there are groups that will advertise themselves to say, we want to invest in stuff. So it's a great thing to do. We've raised money for Vigilant Aerospace, mostly through angel groups and then through several seed funds now that do early stage investing of slightly more mature companies. So they're professional investors investing other people's money. If you have a business that is not likely to scale, but that is likely to have enough cash flow to throw off a good return for maybe an individual investor, then there are small private equity investors. And I really mean individuals who may be interested in your industry. Maybe they're showing up at conferences in your industry and they're looking for investments. That is essentially like an angel investor, but they're not looking necessarily for fast growth. They're looking to be involved in the industry and maybe co-own a company with someone. And so that type of investor, there's a lot of those people in Oklahoma, honestly. You know, Oklahoma has a lot of very successful entrepreneurs who are willing to invest, but they obviously have backgrounds in industries that are prevalent here, right? So a lot of oil and gas people who will invest in oil and gas and then some other things. Lots of real estate people, lots of manufacturers, other people who've been very successful and may want to come back and reinvest in industries that they know or things that are adjacent to industries that they know. So that's does that answer kind of part of the first part of your question? Yeah. And what was the second half of your question? Remind me.
About Kickstarter and Indiegogo.
Yeah. Well, so obviously those are around products, right? So if you have a product that you think you can essentially pre-sell the development of and then the delivery of through one of those platforms, you know, those are great. And I know people that have used those and really enjoy. I know people both who buy stuff like obsessively, like they buy a lot of stuff through Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and then known a few people that have launched things very successfully.
So it would be applicable to a service industry?
I think it's really hard to do, you know, Kickstarter and Indiegogo with a service industry product. I don't know that it's impossible. I don't know that much about it, but I just know that most of what people are looking for are products that, you know, that are unique and interesting and that they like and that they can put some money into and then get and physically have in their hand when they're done, right? So, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Great questions. Do we have any on this side of the room? Yes.
What's your investment strategy when you're building your portfolio?
When we talk about investment strategy, I can describe the strategies of particular things I've been involved in. So for example, I'll give you an example. Venture Accelerator has a seed fund. We had a seed fund. We had 2 seed funds associated, one for each year essentially, and the account has to basically be empty at the end of the year. It's a 1-year seed fund. And so we had certain things that we were looking for, acting as angel investors, seed fund managers, and an accelerator. We were looking for companies that had all that potential for growth, had a great team, had a great story, would present well, because accelerators are all about being able to present well at a pitch day and then raise that next round. So you've got to have that to succeed in an accelerator environment. And then we had particular focus areas. We were focused on online education, which was growing really rapidly. This is 5 years ago, roughly. And so that was a big focus. And then retail and logistics technologies, that was a big emphasis for us. So we had a particular investment thesis because we had some expertise among some of our founders. And so our investment thesis as investors emerged from that expertise. We wanted to invest in things that we felt we knew or could figure out. And you'll find that a lot with angel investors, right? You really want to find angel investors who are maybe very successful people in your industry or have recently retired or left that industry or are peripheral to your industry. Because those are the people who will understand you well enough to be confident that they can make an investment. So when you talk about an investment thesis for angel investors, for example, that's often what it is. I want to invest in the next big thing among the people that I know in the industry or in the industry that I'm familiar with, because I'm comfortable taking some of my success and then sharing it onward to one or two or some of them have diversification. They'll put a very small amount in a dozen companies. And they're much better off doing that because it's likely one of those will be successful. So, if you're talking about angel investors, those are the types of investment portfolios that they build.
And one thing I might add on to that, in addition to the funds that they would invest in your business, if they are already connected with other individuals in that industry, they're generating more value than just the funds that they're investing. They're bringing you connections, which is giving them incentive to make it work for both of you. Great question. Do you have any other questions? Kraettli will hang out a little bit afterwards if anyone wants to ask some offline questions. I think we'll go ahead and bring up some of the raffle tickets here in a second and give out some cool stuff. Yeah. So thanks again for coming out with us tonight. We're going to sign off from online here and say goodbye to the world, and we'll see you next time. So thank you guys. We'll stick around for the raffles.
Thank you all very much.